Welcome back to our overview of data literacy. Part 5 will be presented in 2 separate videos to keep things concise and manageable. At the beginning of this overview, you were told that data literacy is the ability to read, work, analyze, and communicate with data. All of these elements are important, and in a sense, communicating data represents the culmination of one's ability to use data to support decision-making. This section explains how to organize and present data analysis to communicate important insights effectively. In the Army, we've been trained to show the bottom line up front, which is still a good rule of thumb. However, the complexity of a problem and the data analytics used to draw actionable insights may require a more structured approach. Framing your argument, conclusions, and recommendations is much like telling a story. Telling a story about the data, the analysis process, and your findings are critical aspects of data literacy. Other important aspects of telling the data story include being mindful of personal biases prior to producing visualizations that support your analysis. Your approach to telling a data story may vary depending on your audience, especially your boss. What is this trying to say? Take a moment to look at this visual. What message does it tell you? The message isn't entirely clear, is it? Are there more contractors in Afghanistan? Did we use more locals in Afghanistan? Why the colors? Why are the numbers associated with gun parts? We'll return to this visual again, but for now, let's say the message is unclear. Take a moment to look at this visual. Now close your eyes or look away from the screen. How many threes were there? Now, how many threes do you see? Of course, there are 6 threes. By simply changing the font color, we've observed a simple yet important technique. Part of your job as a data storyteller is not just doing the analysis and making the chart. It's about making it easy for the audience to understand what you have found during your analysis. The next section will focus on setting up your data story. Effective data storytelling requires the right data, but also the right narrative and the right visualization. Your message and its conclusion must be clear, understandable, and memorable. Ultimately, you want to be in the middle of this Venn diagram. Being in the center is the goal because this is where all 3 elements, data, narrative, and visuals, converge. This ensures our conclusions are clear, understandable, and memorable. If we get this right, we can drive meaningful organizational change. Let's aim to create stories that inform and inspire action. Data represents the factual foundation of the story, consisting of raw numbers, statistics, and other information that provide the basis for analysis and insights. During our discussion of SMART questions, we learned about the importance of accuracy, relevance, and context. Context, in this case, means helping the audience understand your story's significance through historical comparisons, benchmarks, or explaining the sources of the data. In previous videos, we talked about collecting and filtering or cleaning the data to include only what is necessary for the narrative. One important goal for telling your data story is capturing or highlighting the trends, patterns, and key insights that you've drawn using the 4 data analytics presented during Part 3 of this overview. The narrative is what ties the data together. It provides structure and meaning, making the data more accessible and engaging. You likely learned about the elements of a story back in 4th or 5th grade. You were taught to establish a clear structure, typically with a beginning, middle, and end. Humans have communicated with stories long before there were computers and PowerPoint. In fact, Homo erectus were very likely our first ancestors to gather around a fire, cook, eat, and share stories that passed on accounts about hunting and the spirit world, knowledge crucial to survival at that time. Visuals are the graphical representations of the data that help illustrate and emphasize the narrative's key points. These representations include charts, graphs, infographics, and other visual aids. Visuals should be clear and easy to interpret. Avoid clutter and unnecessary elements that can distract from the main message. More importantly, visuals should support the narrative and highlight important data points. Irrelevant visuals can confuse the audience. Likewise, poorly constructed or unappealing designs can be distracting and weaken your argument and decrease interest in what you are trying to say. Consistent colors, fonts, and styles help create a cohesive visual story. In this section, we'll explore the psychology behind data interpretation and identify common biases and fallacies that can distort our analysis and, by extension, the data story we may be developing. Understanding these biases is important in becoming critical data consumers and ensuring our conclusions are accurate and reliable. Daniel Kahneman's work on cognitive psychology, particularly his description of System 1 and System 2 thinking, provides valuable insights into how we process information and make decisions. System 1 is fast, automatic, and intuitive, while System 2 is slow, deliberate, and analytical. Understanding these two systems helps us recognize when our quick judgments might be influenced by biases and when we need to engage in more thoughtful analysis. By being aware of these thinking processes, we can make better, more informed decisions. Take a minute to consider this problem. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat cost $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? If the first thing that popped into your head was 10 cents, well then congratulations, your System 1 thinking is working just fine. Let's analyze this problem a little bit closer. Here's what is given by the problem. We can substitute equation 2 into equation 1 for the variable, bat. Next, we simplify and isolate ball on the other side of the equation. Then we solve for ball by dividing by 2. Most decisions are not solely based on logic. Even when we are presented with reliable data, we can make the wrong conclusions. Using the System 2 side of your brain requires effort, which we tend to avoid whenever possible. It's not that people are inherently lazy, it's just that System 2 thinking is slow. It requires a lot of work, and we are busy people with stuff to do, right? Let's examine another problem to see how our intuition stacks up against the actual data. Suppose a family has 2 children, and we know that one of them is a boy. What is the probability that the family has 2 boys? The other can be either a boy or a girl, so the answer must be 1 out of 2, or 50%. Pretty easy, right? Well, first let's consider all possible combinations of 2 children. Without any additional information, the probability of having 2 boys out of these 4 possibilities is 1 out of 4, or 25%. However, we don't have a universal set. We know that one of the children in this family is a boy, so this changes our set of possibilities, and we can eliminate the girl and girl combination because it doesn't fit our condition. With this new information, the probability of having 2 boys out of these 3 possibilities is 1 out of 3, or 33%. So to recap, there's only one possibility here where both children are boys, and we have 3 valid possibilities. So the probability that both children are boys, given that one of them is already a boy, is 1/3. This example illustrates how additional information can significantly change our probability calculations. While our intuition might initially suggest a different probability, a structured approach using your System 2 thinking reveals the correct answer. This brings us to the psychology of data. If we present data contradictory to the beliefs of our audience, then we need to engage in higher order thinking to convince them. To illustrate this, let's look at these 2 statements. Depending on where you sit on the political spectrum, you may have 2 different reactions. Researchers found that when confronted with graphics, the effect of the previous political viewpoints were diminished. So on the left, you can visually see that the number of weekly insurgent attacks dropped significantly after the Bush administration's Iraq surge began. On the right, we see the number of jobs in the U.S. increasing in the year 2010 after President Obama's job plan was initiated. When we combine effective graphics with the effective narrative, we can better break through those preconceived beliefs. Let's explore a common cognitive bias known as the conjunction fallacy through this example. Linda is a 31-year-old, single, outspoken, and very bright young woman. She majored in philosophy. As a student, Linda was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and even participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. So which is more probable? Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement? So at first glance, many people might be tempted to choose option 2 because Linda's detailed description seems to align well with someone who is active in the feminist movement. However, it is more statistically likely that Linda is a bank teller. This is the space where our Venn diagram overlaps. It's called an intersection. We don't need math to observe that an intersection must be less likely than either condition alone. This leads us to the conjunction fallacy, and the conjunction fallacy occurs when people incorrectly believe that specific conditions are more probable than a single general one. In probability terms, the likelihood of 2 events occurring together in conjunction is always less than or equal to the likelihood of either one occurring alone. There's no easy way to eliminate our biases and the deeply held beliefs that may support these biases. After all, once we have an actionable insight, we want to figure out the best way to convey that insight. To do this, we often must recognize and overcome bias. Here's a short list of common biases and fallacies that may impact our ability to communicate our findings and data-informed recommendations. Confirmation bias, the tendency to search for and accept only evidence that supports one's belief. Survivorship bias, the focus on what succeeded while ignoring what failed. For example, during World War II, the Allies aimed to make a data-driven decision on where to place thicker armor on their bombers. They couldn't armor the entire airplane, as it would hinder takeoff, reduce range, or make it slower and a much easier target. So, they collected data on the returning bombers to identify where they were hit. Initially, the data suggested reinforcing the wing extremities and the fuselage. However, a brilliant mathematician named Abraham Wald questioned the missing bullet holes. He considered that the aircraft that didn't return and pointed out that the dataset was incomplete. The recommendation then shifted to armoring the engine and the cockpit area. Cursive knowledge. This relates to understanding your audience. Assuming everyone has the same background knowledge can lead to misunderstanding. Senior leaders know you are an expert, so it's important to speak simply and concisely to ensure that your message is clear. Correlation fallacy. We've already talked about this. The phrase correlation does not necessarily mean causation highlights this fallacy. We also referred to it in the context of spurious correlations. Sharpshooter fallacy. This occurs when one shoots randomly at a target and then draws a bullseye around the bullet holes. In practice, this means selectively choosing data that supports a conclusion and ignoring the rest. Hasty generalization fallacy. Have you ever made broad claims based on insufficient evidence? For example, your colleague says, "I served under 3 brigade commanders who were all infantry officers. None of them cared about maintenance." Clearly, infantry officers are not interested in maintenance. This statement might be compelling, but it's certainly not true, is it? We can't eliminate all bias from our thoughts and actions. However, reflecting on how we may signal our thoughts and feelings is an important aspect of improving our ability to present findings, results, and recommendations in a way that doesn't inadvertently cloud the clear interpretation of our message. We will continue Part 5, Communicating Data, in the following video. Afterward, there will be a short summary.